"You are a burden," my son scoffed, locking me out in the storm. I sat on the curb eating leftovers. A limousine screeched to a halt. A millionaire stepped out and froze. "Mrs. Daly? 20 years ago, when he was poor, I fed him with my own money. He cried, helped me up, and marched to my son's house. When he kicked the door open, he said 3 words that changed everything. 'I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Daly, and at 63 years old, I never thought I'd be sitting on a curb in the rain, eating leftover meatloaf from a soggy paper plate while my own son's words echoed in my mind. You are a burden.' The storm had started an hour ago, but I'd been standing outside Roman's house much longer than that. The rain soaked through my thin cardigan, the one I'd knitted myself last winter when the heating bills got too high. My gray hair hung in wet strands around my face, and I could taste the salt of my own tears mixing with the rainwater. Mom, I can't do this anymore. That's how it started. Roman had opened the door with that expression I'd grown to dread over the past 2 years since he married Vanessa. Cold, distant, like looking at a stranger wearing my son's face. I had knocked on their door because my landlord had given me 3 days to come up with $800 or face eviction. $800. Such a small amount for Roman, who drove a BMW and lived in this beautiful 2-story house in the suburbs. But when I asked for help, he looked at me like I'd asked him to move mountains. "You're 63, Mom. When are you going to figure your life out?" His voice was sharp, cutting. Behind him, I could see Vanessa in the kitchen, pretending to be busy but clearly listening to every word. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her nails freshly manicured. Everything about her screamed money and status. "Roman, please. I just need a small loan. I'll pay you back as soon as I get my next job." My voice had sounded small, desperate. I hated how pathetic I sounded, but desperation makes you swallow your pride. He shook his head, his jaw tight with annoyance. "You said the same thing last time, and the time before that. Vanessa and I are trying to build our future here, and frankly, you're holding us back." "Holding you back?" The words hit me like a physical blow. "Roman, I'm your mother. I raised you by myself after your father left. I worked double shifts at the diner to make sure you had everything you needed. And I'm grateful for that," he said, but his tone suggested otherwise. "But that was your job as a parent. I don't owe you anything for doing what you were supposed to do." That's when Vanessa appeared beside him, her hand sliding possessively around his waist. "Roman's right, Daly. We can't keep enabling your poor financial decisions. Maybe if you'd been more responsible with money over the years, you wouldn't be in this position." Poor financial decisions. As if choosing between electricity and groceries was a poor decision. As if working 3 part-time jobs because no one wants to hire someone over 60 was irresponsible. "I think it's best if you leave," Roman said, already starting to close the door. "Vanessa and I need to discuss our boundaries moving forward." Boundaries. As if I was some kind of threat instead of the woman who had sung him to sleep every night, who had walked the floors with him when he had colic, who had saved every penny to buy him school clothes and Christmas presents. "Roman, wait," I started, but the door was already closing. "You're a burden, Mom," he said through the narrowing gap. "It's time you accepted that." The door clicked shut, leaving me standing on the porch as the first drops of rain began to fall. I stood there for a long time, staring at the door, hoping he might change his mind, hoping he might remember who I used to be to him. But the lights went out in the front room, and I knew they'd gone to bed, leaving me outside in the growing storm. So here I was, sitting on the curb 3 blocks away from Roman's house, eating the leftover meatloaf I'd brought for their dinner. It was cold and rubbery now, but it was all the food I had until my next job interview tomorrow. If I even made it to tomorrow. The rain was coming down harder now, and my clothes were soaked through. Cars passed by, their headlights cutting through the darkness, but no one stopped. Why would they? I was just another old woman who'd outlived her usefulness. I thought about the little apartment I was about to lose. Nothing fancy, just a 1-bedroom place with thin walls and a leaky faucet. But it was mine. I'd made it home with secondhand furniture and photographs of better times. Pictures of Roman as a little boy, grinning toothlessly at the camera. Pictures of his high school graduation, where he'd hugged me so tight and whispered, "Thanks for everything, Mom. I love you." When had that boy become this man who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience? The headlights of another car appeared through the rain, but instead of passing by, this one slowed down. I looked up, squinting through the downpour, as a sleek black limousine pulled to the curb in front of me. The engine hummed quietly, expensive and smooth. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the passenger door opened, and a man in an expensive suit stepped out, apparently unbothered by the rain. He was tall, probably in his 40s, with graying temples and kind eyes. He looked at me for a long moment, his expression shifting from confusion to something like recognition. "Mrs. Daly?" His voice was uncertain, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. I blinked up at him, wiping rain from my face. I didn't recognize him, but something about his voice seemed familiar. "Do I know you?" He took a step closer, and I could see genuine shock in his features. "It's me, Jared Morrison." The name hit me like lightning. Jared. The skinny, desperate young man I'd found sleeping behind the diner where I worked 20 years ago. The boy who'd been living on the streets, too proud to beg but too hungry to survive much longer. Jared? I struggled to my feet, the wet paper plate falling from my lap. "Oh my goodness, look at you." But he wasn't smiling. His face was a mask of concern and something that looked like anger, though not directed at me. "Mrs. Daly, what are you doing out here, in this storm?" I opened my mouth to answer, but what could I say? That my own son had thrown me out? That the boy I'd raised to be better than his father had become exactly what I'd feared? The shame was overwhelming. I started, but my voice broke. Jared's expression softened, and without another word, he shrugged off his expensive coat and draped it around my shoulders. The fabric was warm and smelled like expensive cologne, such a stark contrast to my damp thrift store clothes. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you somewhere warm and dry." As he helped me toward the limousine, I caught a glimpse of his face in the streetlight. This successful, powerful man was crying. Actual tears were streaming down his cheeks as he looked at me, the woman who had once fed him when no one else would. But what I didn't know yet, what would only become clear in the days to come, was that Jared Morrison wasn't just successful. He was one of the most powerful men in the city. And my son Roman, the one who had just called me a burden and left me in the rain, worked for a company that was about to discover just how far gratitude could reach. The limousine door closed behind us with a soft, expensive sound, sealing out the storm. But inside the warm, leather-scented interior, I could feel that another kind of storm was just beginning. The inside of the limousine was like stepping into another world. Soft leather seats, ambient lighting, and warmth that seemed to wrap around me like an embrace. Jared sat across from me, his eyes still filled with that mixture of disbelief and something deeper, a pain that seemed to echo my own. "Mrs. Daly," he said softly, reaching forward to adjust the coat around my shoulders. "I can't believe. What happened? How did you end up?" He gestured helplessly toward the window, where the storm continued to rage. I pulled his coat tighter around myself, feeling the expensive fabric against my skin. How could I explain what my life had become? How could I tell this successful man that the little boy I'd once saved had grown up while my own son had forgotten everything I'd taught him about kindness? "It's complicated," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Jared leaned forward, his expression intense. "Mrs. Daly, do you remember what you told me 20 years ago? The first night you found me behind Richardson's diner?" I did remember. How could I forget? He'd been so thin, maybe 22 or 23, wearing clothes that hung off his frame like empty sacks. His eyes had been hollow with hunger and pride warring against desperation. "You said, 'Everyone deserves dignity, especially when they're down.'" His voice was thick with emotion. "You didn't just give me food that night. You gave me hope." The memory came flooding back with painful clarity. I'd been working the late shift at Richardson's, like I did every Tuesday and Thursday to make extra money for Roman's school supplies. It was nearly midnight when I'd taken the trash out to the dumpster and found him there, trying to sleep on a piece of cardboard. "I wasn't trying to steal anything," he'd said quickly, scrambling to his feet. It was warm back here." I'd looked at this young man, probably close to Roman's age, and seen something that broke my heart. Not just hunger, but shame. The kind of shame that comes from having nowhere else to turn. "When's the last time you ate?" I'd asked him. "I'm not looking for handouts," he'd replied, lifting his chin with what little dignity he had left. "Good," I'd said, "because I'm not offering one. I'm offering a job. The dishwasher called in sick and I need help closing up. Pays $20 and includes dinner." It wasn't true, of course. The dishwasher was probably at home sleeping soundly. But I'd seen enough pride to know that charity would only hurt him more. Now, sitting in his limousine 20 years later, Jared was smiling through his tears. "You did that for 3 months. Every Tuesday and Thursday, you'd somehow need help with something right around the time I'd be looking for a place to sleep. You were a good worker," I said. And it was true. He'd been grateful for every opportunity, never taking anything for granted. "I knew you were making up those jobs," he said quietly, "but you let me keep my dignity while you saved my life." Do you know what happened after that? After I finally got enough money together to rent a real room? I shook my head. After he'd stopped coming around the diner, I'd assumed he'd found something better. I'd hoped he had. I got my GED, then I applied for community college. I worked construction during the day and went to classes at night. Every time I wanted to quit, every time it felt impossible, I remembered what you said about everyone deserving dignity, about how circumstances don't define a person's worth. The limousine turned a corner, and I realized we were heading toward the expensive part of town, where Roman had always dreamed of living. Where he now lived, in a house he could afford because of his good job at Morrison Industries. Morrison Industries. The name hit me like a thunderbolt. "Jared," I said slowly. "Morrison Industries. That's mine," he said simply. "I built it from nothing. From sleeping behind dumpsters to owning half the commercial real estate in this city. And it all started with a $60 a week job washing dishes for a woman who saw something worth saving in a homeless kid." My hands began to tremble. Morrison Industries was huge. I'd seen their logo on buildings all over the city, heard their name in the news. And Roman. Roman worked for one of their subsidiary companies, always bragging about how his boss respected him, how he was moving up in the company. "Mrs. Daly," Jared said gently, noticing my shock, "who left you out in that storm tonight?" Before I could answer, his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and frowned. "I'm sorry, I need to take this. It's about tomorrow's board meeting." He answered the phone, his voice immediately becoming more businesslike. "Morrison here." There was a pause as he listened. "No, I want the Henderson account handled personally. And make sure Roman Patterson from the subsidiary gets the memo about the new compliance standards. I want to see his department's numbers tomorrow." Roman Patterson, my son's name spoken so casually by the man whose life I'd helped save 20 years ago. The irony was so sharp it physically hurt. Jared ended the call and looked at me with concern. "I'm sorry about that. Business never stops, even during storms." He paused, studying my face. "Mrs. Daly, you look like you've seen a ghost." "Roman Patterson," I whispered. "You mentioned Roman Patterson." Jared's eyebrows rose. "Yes, he works for one of our subsidiary companies. Do you know him?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the coincidence, or perhaps fate. "He's my son." The silence in the limousine was deafening. When I opened my eyes, Jared was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Shock, certainly. But underneath that, something darker was forming. "Your son," he repeated slowly. "Roman Patterson is your son. And he left you out in a storm to eat leftover food on a street corner." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Jared was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he processed this information. When he finally spoke, his voice was deadly calm. "Mrs. Daly, where were you planning to sleep tonight?" I don't know. Maybe the bus station stays open, Or there's a 24-hour laundromat on 5th Street. No, he said firmly. You're staying in my guest suite tonight. Tomorrow, we're going to have a conversation with your son. The way he said it made my stomach clench with both hope and fear. Jared, I don't want charity. And I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything. Owe you? He leaned forward, his eyes intense. Mrs. Daly, I owe you everything. My education, my business, my entire life. It all started with your kindness. And now I find out that the woman who saved me is being treated like garbage by her own son, who happens to work for my company. His voice was rising slightly, the controlled businessman facade slipping to reveal the anger underneath. Do you know what Roman Patterson makes a year, Mrs. Daly? $85,000, plus bonuses. He makes more in 2 months than you probably see in a year. The number hit me like a physical blow, $85,000, and he couldn't spare $800 to help his mother keep her apartment. Tomorrow, Jared said, his voice returning to that dangerous calm. I think it's time Mr. Patterson learned about the true meaning of burden. As the limousine pulled through the gates of what I assumed was Jared's estate, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not hope, exactly, but something close to it. For the first time in a long time, someone was angry on my behalf. Someone cared enough to be outraged by how I'd been treated. But what I didn't know yet, what Jared hadn't told me, was just how much power he wielded in this city. Roman wasn't just an employee of a subsidiary company. He was entirely dependent on Jared's business empire for his lifestyle, his reputation, his future. And Jared Morrison had never forgotten a kindness. More importantly, he'd never forgotten when kindness was betrayed. I woke up in a bed softer than any I'd slept in for years. For a moment, I forgot where I was. The Egyptian cotton sheets, the view of manicured gardens through floor-to-ceiling windows, the scent of fresh flowers from an arrangement that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Then it all came rushing back. The storm, Roman's cruel words, and Jared Morrison finding me on that curb like a guardian angel from my past. A gentle knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Mrs. Daly, it's Jared. Are you awake? Come in, I called, pulling the silk robe he'd provided tighter around myself. He entered carrying a breakfast tray, his face grave but determined. He was dressed impeccably in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than I'd made in 6 months, but his eyes held the same kindness I remembered from that hungry young man 20 years ago. I've been thinking all night, he said, setting the tray on the bedside table. About you, about Roman, about what needs to happen next. I sat up slowly, my body aching from yesterday's ordeal. Jared, I appreciate everything you've done, but I don't want you to get involved in my family problems. He sat in the chair beside the bed, leaning forward with his hands clasped. Mrs. Daly, with all due respect, this stopped being just a family problem the moment I found you eating scraps in the rain. Do you know what I've discovered about your son since last night? I shook my head, though something in his tone made my stomach clench. Roman Patterson has been with Morrison Industries for 4 years. He started as a junior account manager and has been promoted 3 times. His current salary, as I mentioned, is $85,000 annually, plus performance bonuses that last year totaled another $12,000. He drives a company car, has premium health insurance, and gets 4 weeks paid vacation. Each detail felt like a small stab to my heart. All of this prosperity, and he couldn't help his own mother with $800. But here's what's really interesting, Jared continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. His wife, Vanessa, she doesn't work. She spends her days at expensive spas, shopping at boutiques, getting her nails done every week at a salon that charges $200 per session. Their mortgage payment is $2,800 a month, and they never miss it. They spent $6,000 on a vacation to Hawaii last month. How do you know all this? I whispered. Because Morrison Industries provides the financing for their mortgage through our banking division. We process their credit cards through our financial services company. I own the spa where Vanessa gets her treatments every Tuesday. His smile was cold. In this city, Mrs. Daly, very little happens without my knowledge. The scope of his business empire was staggering. This wasn't just success. This was power on a level I'd never imagined. A buzz from his phone interrupted us. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted. "Speaking of your son, he's downstairs in my lobby right now, demanding to see me." Apparently, he received an urgent message this morning requesting his immediate presence for a special consultation. My blood ran cold. "Jared, what did you do?" "Nothing yet," he said, standing. "But I think it's time Mr. Patterson learned exactly who he's been working for. Would you like to come down and watch? Or would you prefer to stay here?" The thought of facing Roman again so soon made me feel sick, but I needed to see this through. "I'll come with you." Jared's office was on the top floor of the Morrison Industries building, a testament to success that took my breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, and the furniture was the kind you see in magazines about wealthy people's homes. But what struck me most was the wall of photographs, images of Jared with mayors, governors, celebrities, and business leaders. This was a man who moved in circles I couldn't even imagine. "He's in the conference room," Jared's assistant informed him, "and he seems agitated." Through the glass walls of the conference room, I could see Roman pacing back and forth. Even from a distance, his anxiety was palpable. He kept checking his phone and running his hands through his hair. Vanessa sat in one of the chairs, her designer handbag clutched in her lap, her face tight with worry. "Why is Vanessa here?" I asked. "I asked her to come," Jared said simply. I thought she should hear this too. We entered the conference room, and Roman immediately spun around. His face went through a series of expressions: relief at seeing who he assumed was the company's owner, confusion when he saw me, and then a dawning horror as he began to put the pieces together. "Mr. Morrison," Roman began, his voice overly formal, "thank you for seeing me on such short notice. I'm Roman Patterson from the Henderson Account Division. I'm not sure why I was called here, but I'm happy to discuss any concerns about my performance." Vanessa's eyes narrowed when she saw me. "Daly, what are you doing here?" "Hello, Vanessa," I said quietly, taking a seat near the back of the room. Jared moved to stand behind the massive conference table, his presence commanding the room. "Mr. Patterson, please sit down. We have quite a bit to discuss." Roman sat stiffly, his confusion evident. "Sir, if this is about the Henderson account, I can explain the quarterly projections." "This isn't about the Henderson account," Jared interrupted. "This is about character, about gratitude, about how a man treats the people who sacrificed everything for him." Roman's face went pale. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't understand." "Let me help you understand," Jared said, his voice deceptively calm. "Last night, during that terrible storm, I found a 63-year-old woman sitting on a street corner, soaked to the bone, eating leftover food from a paper plate. She'd been thrown out of her own son's house and called a burden." Roman's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Vanessa's perfectly manicured hand flew to her throat. "That woman," Jared continued, never taking his eyes off Roman, "was Mrs. Daly, your mother. Do you know who she is to me, Mr. Patterson?" Roman shook his head mutely. 20 years ago, when I was homeless and starving, your mother saved my life. She gave me work when no one else would. She fed me when I had nothing. She saw worth in me when I couldn't see it in myself." Jared's voice was rising slightly. "Everything I am today, everything I've built, started with her kindness." The silence in the room was deafening. Roman was staring at his hands, his face flushed with shame. Vanessa was looking back and forth between Jared and me, her expression calculating. "So you can imagine my surprise," Jared continued, "when I discovered that the woman who saved me is being treated like garbage by her own son. A son who, incidentally, owes his comfortable lifestyle to the company I built with the foundation she provided." Roman finally found his voice. "Mr. Morrison, I had no idea you knew my mother. If I'd known..." "If you'd known what?" Jared's voice was like ice. "That treating your mother with respect might benefit your career? That basic human decency might be good for business?" "That's not what I meant," Roman stammered. "Then what did you mean? Because from where I'm sitting, It looks like you thought you could treat the most important person in my life like trash without consequences. Vanessa suddenly stood up, her voice sharp with panic. Roman, what is he talking about? What did you do? I didn't do anything. Roman snapped at her, then immediately looked embarrassed by his outburst in front of his boss. You threw her out, Jared said flatly. In a storm. You called her a burden. You make $97,000 a year working for my company, and you couldn't spare $800 to help the woman who raised you. The number hit me like a physical blow. $97,000. He'd been lying about his income even to his wife. Vanessa's face went white. Roman, you told me you only made $70,000. Where is the extra money going? Vanessa, not now, Roman hissed. But the damage was done. No, I think now is perfect, Jared said smoothly. Let's talk about where that money goes. The secret savings account, the gambling, the loans to friends that never get repaid. Should I continue? Roman looked like he was about to be sick. How could Jared possibly know about all of this? Here's what's going to happen, Jared announced, his voice returning to that dangerous calm. Mr. Patterson, you're going to take a little vacation while I decide whether Morrison Industries is the right fit for someone with your character. Mrs. Patterson, you might want to think about whether the lifestyle you've been living is sustainable. You can't just suspend me without cause, Roman said desperately. I can do whatever I want, Jared replied simply. This is my company. But don't worry, I'm sure you'll figure something out. After all, you're very good at solving problems when it benefits you. As Roman and Vanessa hurried from the room, whispering frantically to each other, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Someone had stood up for me. Someone had seen my worth and been willing to fight for it. But I also felt afraid. The power Jared wielded was intoxicating, but it was also dangerous, and I wasn't sure what he planned to do next. 3 days passed in a strange limbo. Jared insisted I stay in his guest suite while he sorted things out, though he remained vague about what exactly that meant. I spent my time walking through his beautiful gardens, reading in his library, and trying to process the surreal turn my life had taken. From facing eviction to living in luxury, it felt like a dream I might wake up from at any moment. But the real world had a way of intruding, even into paradise. On Thursday morning, my phone rang. Roman's name appeared on the screen, and my heart lurched. Despite everything, he was still my son. I answered on the 4th ring. Mom? His voice was strained, desperate. Mom, I need to talk to you. I'm listening, I said quietly, settling into the chair by the window. I lost my job. The words came out in a rush. Morrison fired me yesterday. Not suspended. Fired. He said it was a character evaluation and that I'd failed. I closed my eyes, feeling a mixture of sadness and inevitability. Roman, and it's not just the job, he continued, his voice cracking. Somehow, word has gotten around. The other companies I've applied to, they all say the position has been filled, but I know they're lying. It's like I've been blacklisted. I wanted to feel triumphant, but all I felt was tired. What does Vanessa say about all this? There was a long pause. Vanessa left. What? She packed her bags yesterday and went to stay with her sister in Florida. She said she couldn't handle the stress and uncertainty. She said she didn't sign up for this. His voice broke on the last words. Despite everything he'd put me through, hearing my son in pain still hurt. I'm sorry, Roman. Are you? His voice turned sharp suddenly. Because I'm pretty sure you're living in luxury right now, while my life falls apart. Morrison told me you were staying with him. His honored guest, he called you. The bitterness in his voice was familiar, but now I recognized it for what it was. The same entitlement that had led him to throw me out in the first place. Jared offered me a place to stay while I figured out my housing situation, I said carefully. Jared, Roman repeated mockingly. You're on a first-name basis with the man who destroyed my career. You destroyed your own career, Roman. Jared just revealed what was already there. So this is my fault? I'm the villain here? His voice was rising. I worked my ass off at that company. I was good at my job. I made them money. But because I had one argument with my mother, I lose everything? One argument? I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. Roman, you called me a burden and threw me out in a storm. You make almost $100,000 a year, and you couldn't spare $800 to keep your mother from being homeless. I didn't know about the money, he shouted. If Morrison hadn't interfered, we could have worked something out. Like what? You made it very clear that I was holding you back. There was silence on the other end of the line. When Roman spoke again, his voice was different, smaller, more like the little boy I remembered. I didn't mean it like that, Mom. I was just... Vanessa's been on my case about money, about appearances. Her friends all have husbands who make more, live better. I felt like I was never enough, so you decided I was the problem. I needed space to figure things out. I thought if I could just get some breathing room, I could help you properly later. When, Roman? When would have been a good time for you to help your mother avoid homelessness? Another long silence. I don't know, he admitted finally. I kept thinking things would get better, that I'd get promoted again, that Vanessa would be happier. I kept thinking there would be time. I stared out at Jared's gardens, where gardeners were carefully tending to rose bushes that probably cost more than most people's monthly salaries. There's always time for kindness, Roman. That's what I tried to teach you when you were little. I know, he whispered. I remember, I forgot somewhere along the way. Yes, you did. Can you forgive me? Can we start over? The question hung in the air between us. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately, to rush back to being the mother who fixed everything, who absorbed all the pain to keep her child happy. But another part of me, a part that had been growing stronger since that night in the rain, hesitated. I don't know, Roman. Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting, or going back to the way things were. What does that mean? Before I could answer, there was a knock at my door. Mrs. Daly, it's Jared. Could I speak with you for a moment? I have to go, I told Roman. Mom, wait. Can we meet? Can we talk in person? I looked toward the door where Jared was waiting. I'll call you back. When? When I'm ready. I hung up and opened the door to find Jared looking unusually serious. I couldn't help but overhear some of your conversation, he said. How are you feeling about everything? Confused, I admitted. Guilty. Sad. Roman sounds genuinely sorry, but you're not sure if he's sorry about what he did or sorry about the consequences? I nodded. Exactly. Jared entered the room and sat in the chair across from mine. Mrs. Daly, I need to tell you something about what I've done. And what I'm planning to do? My stomach tightened. What do you mean? Roman's employment situation isn't accidental. I've made it very clear to certain people in this city that hiring him would be unwise. The same goes for any company that might want to do business with Morrison Industries. Jared, I said slowly, that's a lot of power to use against one person. Is it? His eyes flashed. Because from where I sit, one person destroyed the life of the woman who saved me. One person thought he could treat you like garbage without consequences. Was I supposed to just let that slide? But he's my son, and you're the closest thing I've ever had to a mother, Jared said fiercely. Do you think I'm going to stand by and watch your own child abuse you? The word abuse hit me like a slap. It wasn't abuse, it was just, what would you call it? Jared interrupted. Emotional manipulation, financial abandonment, throwing a 63-year-old woman out in a storm? If he'd done that to a stranger, he'd be arrested. I sat quietly, processing his words. Was that what it had been? Abuse? I have something to show you, Jared said, pulling out his phone. This arrived this morning. He handed me the device, and I saw a text message from an unknown number. Tell that old bitch that ruining my marriage wasn't enough. Now she's destroyed my career too. She's going to pay for this. My hands started shaking as I read the words. Roman sent this? About an hour ago. To my personal number, which he shouldn't have access to. The cruelty of the message, the venom in it, made me feel physically ill. This wasn't the son who had just called me, sounding broken and apologetic. This was someone else entirely. There's more, Jared said gently. He scrolled to another message. I know where you live. I know where she's staying. This isn't over. The phone slipped from my trembling hands. He threatened you? Because of me? Not because of you, Jared corrected firmly. Because of his own choices. Because instead of taking responsibility for his actions, he's decided to blame everyone else. I felt tears starting to fall. I don't understand. On the phone just now, he sounded so sorry, so broken. Because he is broken, Jared said. But not in the way you think. He's broken in a way that makes him dangerous to you. What are you going to do? What I should have done from the beginning, Jared replied. I'm going to make sure you're safe, and I'm going to give Roman Patterson a choice. Get help for his problems, or face the consequences of threatening the people I care about. As I sat there, staring at the threatening messages from my own son, I realized that the storm 3 nights ago hadn't been the end of my troubles. It had been the beginning of something much bigger, much more complicated than I'd ever imagined. But for the first time in years, I wasn't facing it alone. 2 weeks after Roman's threatening messages, Jared made an announcement that would change everything. I'm hosting a dinner, he told me over breakfast in his sun-drenched dining room. Nothing too elaborate, just some local business leaders, community organizers, a few people from the mayor's office. I want to tell them about someone very special who made my success possible. My coffee cup rattled against the saucer as I set it down. Jared, no, I don't want to be paraded around like some charity case. That's not what this is about, he said firmly. This is about honor, about making sure people know the truth. What truth? That kindness has power, that one person's compassion can change everything. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. Mrs. Daly, for 20 years I've been building this empire, making money, gaining influence, but I've never told the story of how it really started. I think it's time people knew. I felt a flutter of panic in my chest. I don't need recognition, Jared. I just need a quiet life, maybe a small apartment where you can hide, he interrupted gently. Where you can make yourself small again? Mrs. Daly, you saved a human being. You saw worth in someone when they couldn't see it themselves. That's not something to hide from. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. It's my security team. Roman has been asking around about the dinner. Apparently he's been telling people he's my guest's son and should be invited. My stomach clenched. What did you tell them? To keep watching him, and to make sure he stays away from Saturday night. That Saturday, I stood in front of the mirror in what had become my room, adjusting the simple black dress Jared had insisted on buying for me. It was elegant without being flashy, expensive without being ostentatious. I barely recognized the woman looking back at me, clean, well-dressed, cared for. You look beautiful, Jared said from the doorway. He was wearing a tailored tuxedo that made him look every inch the powerful businessman he'd become. Are you ready? I'm terrified, I admitted. Good, he said with a gentle smile. That means it matters. The dining room had been transformed. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, and fresh flowers adorned every surface. 24 people sat around the mahogany table, faces I recognized from the newspaper, names I'd heard on the radio. The mayor was there, along with several city council members, the heads of 3 major charities, and business leaders whose decisions affected thousands of lives. As we took our seats, I noticed that everyone was looking at me with polite curiosity. They knew I was important to Jared somehow, but they didn't know why. Ladies and gentlemen, Jared began, standing as the last course was cleared away, thank you for joining me tonight. I know you're wondering why I asked you here, why I wanted you to meet Mrs. Daly. The room grew quiet, everyone's attention focused on him. 20 years ago, I was nobody. Worse than nobody. I was homeless, sleeping behind dumpsters, proud and hungry and convinced that the world had given up on me. His voice carried easily through the room, commanding attention. I was wrong. The world hadn't given up on me. But it took one person, one extraordinary person to show me that. He turned toward me, and I felt my cheeks burn as all eyes followed his gaze. Mrs. Daly found me behind Richardson's diner on a Tuesday night in November. She could have called the police. She could have ignored me. Instead, she offered me work, dignity, hope. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. She fed me when I was starving. She paid me when I had nothing. She saw potential in me when I couldn't see anything but failure. I wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor, but Jared's words held me captive. Everything I've built, every success I've achieved, every job I've created, every life I've touched through my businesses, it all started with Mrs. Daly's kindness. She didn't save me because she expected anything in return. She saved me because she believed every person deserves dignity. The room was completely silent now. I could see faces around the table, some moved to tears, others nodding in recognition of a universal truth. 2 weeks ago, Jared continued, his voice hardening, I found Mrs. Daly sitting on a street corner in the rain, eating leftover food from a paper plate. She'd been thrown out of her son's house and called a burden. The woman who saved my life was being treated like garbage by her own child. A collective intake of breath rippled around the table. Mrs. Chen from the Community Foundation gasped softly. The mayor shook his head in disbelief. I tell you this story not to embarrass anyone, but to remind us all that kindness matters, that how we treat the vulnerable among us defines who we are as a community. Jared raised his glass. To Mrs. Daly, who taught me that everyone deserves dignity, especially when they're down. The entire table stood, glasses raised, voices joining in a chorus of, to Mrs. Daly. The warmth in their faces, the genuine respect I saw there, overwhelmed me completely. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen, not as a burden, not as a failure, but as a human being whose life had mattered. As people began to mingle after dinner, I found myself surrounded by genuine interest and warmth. Mrs. Chen approached me with tears in her eyes. Mrs. Daly, what you did for Jared, it's exactly the kind of impact we hope to make with our community programs. Have you ever considered getting involved in social work? Before I could answer, Mayor Henderson joined our conversation. Ma'am, I hope you know that your story is going to inspire a lot of people. We need more folks like you in this city. The evening continued with similar conversations, each person sharing their own stories of kindness received or given, of moments when someone had seen worth in them when they couldn't see it themselves. I began to understand what Jared had meant about the power of truth. But as the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Jared's head of security approached him with a concerned expression. Sir, we have a situation. Roman Patterson has been outside the gates for the past hour. He appears to be intoxicated, and he's demanding to speak with his mother. My blood ran cold. How did he know I was here? The dinner was mentioned in the society pages, Jared explained grimly. Not by name, but enough details that he could piece it together. Through the windows, I could see flashing red and blue lights. Did someone call the police? I did, Jared said. When he started trying to climb the gate, as if summoned by our conversation, we heard shouting from outside. Roman's voice, slurred and angry, carried across the grounds. I know you're in there. You think you're better than me now? You ruined my life. The remaining guests looked uncomfortable, unsure whether to leave or stay. Mrs. Chen placed a gentle hand on my arm. Is there anything we can do to help? I shook my head, feeling the familiar shame creeping back in. I'm sorry about this. This is my fault. No, Jared said firmly. This is not your fault. This is what addiction and entitlement look like when they're cornered. Through the window, I watched as police officers approached Roman. Even from a distance, I could see his unsteady gait, his aggressive gestures. This was my son, the little boy I'd raised to be kind and gentle, acting like a stranger I didn't recognize. Mrs. Daly, Mayor Henderson said quietly, I want you to know that what's happening out there doesn't change anything about what we heard tonight. Your story, your kindness, that's who you are. This situation with your son is separate from that. As the police led Roman away, still shouting accusations and threats, I realized something profound had shifted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by my relationship to him. I wasn't Roman's mother, or the woman who failed to raise him right. I was Mrs. Daly, the woman who had saved Jared Morrison, who had shown kindness to a stranger, who had mattered in ways I'd never understood. But I also realized that Roman's downward spiral was far from over. The look in his eyes as the police car drove away wasn't defeat. It was rage. And rage, I was learning, could be far more dangerous than desperation. The evening that had started as a celebration of kindness had revealed something darker underneath. Roman wasn't just angry about losing his job or his wife. He was furious about losing control over me, about watching me find worth and recognition outside of his approval. And that fury, I suspected, was about to get much worse before it got better. 6 months after that dinner party, I stood in the doorway of my new office at the Morrison Foundation, watching the morning sun stream through windows that overlooked the city where my life had been transformed. The nameplate on my desk read, Daley Morrison, Director of Community Outreach. Morrison, Jared had insisted I take his name, not as an adoption but as an honor, a way of making me officially part of the family I'd helped create. Mrs. Morrison, my assistant Sarah called from the outer office. Your 10 o'clock appointment is here. I smoothed my blazer. Another gift from Jared, who seemed determined to make up for 20 years of my struggles, and checked my reflection in the window. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the broken person who had sat in the rain 6 months ago. This woman had purpose, dignity, and most importantly, peace. Send him in, I called back. The door opened and Roman walked in. I barely recognized him. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a clean but worn button-down shirt. He'd lost weight, and his face bore the kind of lines that come from hard thinking rather than easy living. Most notably, his eyes, once cold and calculating, held something I hadn't seen in years: humility. "Hello, Mom," he said quietly, stopping just inside the doorway as if unsure whether he was welcome. "Hello, Roman. Please sit down." He took the chair across from my desk, his movements careful and deliberate. "I wasn't sure you'd agree to see me." "I almost didn't," I admitted. What changed my mind was a letter I received from Dr. Martinez at the rehabilitation center. She said you'd completed the full program and that you'd specifically requested family counseling as part of your aftercare. Roman nodded, his gaze fixed on his hands. 6 months sober, he said, and it's been the hardest 6 months of my life. Tell me about it. He took a deep breath, finally meeting my eyes. After that night when the police arrested me, I spent 3 days in jail. 3 days thinking about what I'd become. When they released me, I had nowhere to go. Vanessa had filed for divorce and taken everything she could from our accounts. I was sleeping in my car. I felt a familiar tug of sympathy, but forced myself to remain quiet. This was his story to tell. On the 4th night, I drove to Richardson's diner. I don't know why. I just ended up there. And I started thinking about the stories you used to tell me about working there, about the people you'd helped. I realized I was sitting in the same parking lot where Mr. Morrison had been homeless 20 years ago. He paused, struggling with the emotion in his voice. That's when it hit me. You'd fed him. You'd given him work. You'd seen something worth saving in a stranger. And I, your own son, had thrown you out in a storm and called you a burden. Tears began sliding down his cheeks. I sat in that parking lot and finally understood what I'd lost. Not just a job or a marriage, but the respect of the most important person in my life. I reached across the desk and handed him a tissue, but I didn't speak. He needed to finish this. I checked myself into rehab the next morning, not just for the drinking, but for everything. The anger, the entitlement, the way I'd treated you. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that I'd been trying to prove my worth to people who didn't matter, while destroying my relationship with the person who did. "And what did you learn?" I asked gently. "That everything good in my life came from you. The values you taught me that I ignored, the work ethic I inherited but used selfishly, even the opportunities I had, they all traced back to the foundation you built." He leaned forward, his voice intense with sincerity. "I learned that success without character is just expensive failure." The phrase caught me off guard. That's very wise. "Dr. Martinez didn't come up with it. You did. You used to say it to me when I was little, when I'd get frustrated about not having the same things as other kids. I'd forgotten, but she helped me remember. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us processing the weight of his words.